Hi, you are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us.
Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Today is the first episode of our 4th season, so thank you to everyone who's been a loyal listener. As a treat, I have a really novel concept for you today. How about this? A new pharmaceutical company focused on women's health has launched with the strategy of actually listening to women. Their strategy is to put women at the center of everything they do, and not just their customers, by the way. 7 out of 10 of their board of directors members, including the chairman of the board, are women, so I know they're going to be listening to them. Another company leader, Organon's head of research and development, Dr. Sandra Milligan, is our guest today. We have a broad agenda planned, including talking about how she got here, personally and professionally, and why she went to both medical school and law school first. We're also going to discuss Organon's Here for Her Health campaign and how you can share your voice, why a new kind of women's health pharmaceutical company is needed now, how our understanding and appreciation of wellness and healthcare has evolved in a near post-COVID world, and her perspective on innovation in women's health, not just the current state of it, but what's still needed. And because we're both women physicians of a certain age, we're going to discuss our own experiences with menopause, as well as some other women's health topics that remain overlooked, misunderstood, and undertreated, ranging from postpartum hemorrhage, still one of the leading causes of maternal mortality worldwide, to endometriosis. Now, before joining Organon, Dr. Milligan served as Merck's Senior Vice President and Head of Global Regulatory Affairs and Clinical Safety. Previously, she served as Vice President of Product Development Regulatory for Genentech, and prior to that, she was at Amgen for 10 years in positions across legal and regulatory affairs functions. So we could say she's been around the pharma block. She also proudly served in the United States Army Medical Corps for 7 years. Dr. Milligan has also served on the board of directors of the Drug Information Association, as well as serving as their chairman of the board. She's a graduate of both George Washington University School of Medicine and Georgetown University Law Center. Dr. Milligan, welcome to the ladies' room.
I'm super excited to be here today. And I didn't know it was the kickoff for the 4th season. So congratulations. That's huge.
Thank you. Thank you. Now everybody has a podcast, but we were here long before the pandemic.
Long before.
Very long. So speaking of the pandemic, of course, it's still going. We're not out of it yet. So I just have to ask, how are you and your family doing, and how did you manage throughout the pandemic?
So I think we were luckier than most. Having a job where I could work remotely, I think was really supportive. Our family's in a place where I have 2 teenagers and they're relatively autonomous and independent. And so, they still need some adulting lessons, but let's just say they know where the cereal box is in the morning and they can get themselves online to school. So I think we were really fortunate. When I look at how the pandemic affected families across our staff, I think that the effect was profound, just depending on what stage the family was in, whether the person was single, married, expecting, had young children at home. I think it was a really different experience overall. So for me, it was in the time of trying to spin out a company. What a strange time to do so. But it gave us a chance to kind of hunker down and really think about how we wanted to develop the company, the position that we wanted to take. And frankly, it was fine to be in kind of a remote setting and not really being out there, because that was the nature of the work anyway. So I appreciate the question, and I do hope that the listeners are generally safe and feel well. And hopefully everyone is seeing kind of an uptick and a light at the end of the tunnel for this round of the pandemic.
And we interrupt this broadcast to bring you a public service announcement that if you haven't been COVID vaccinated, please
do
put us on pause and run to your nearest vaccination center. There's no line and no waiting at most vaccination places now. And I am proudly vaccinated. I assume that you are.
I am too. Yeah.
Also happy to say that 100% of my extended family, which is really, really, really large, is now fully, 100% of my extended family over age 12 is
Fantastic.
fully vaccinated. And of course,
Exactly.
children can't get vaccinated yet. And what we're learning about the Delta variant is that it is still being carried mostly by unvaccinated teenagers and
Hmm.
in populations that are not vaccinated. So I gave a very brief overview of your tremendous accomplishments, but I think what people really want to know is, how did you get here to this? Was this
Yeah.
planned? Did this just kind of happen? How do you go from medical school to law school to the military, or where was the military in that? Um,
It's a great question. And I wish I could tell you that it was a thoughtful plan that I executed on the day that I graduated from high school. But in reality, medical school for me was a reach. My family, my immediate family folks had not gone to college yet. And so it was really kind of a trend breaker there. And to get into medical school was an enormous achievement for me and my family and the support system I had. The I don't know how I thought I actually was going to fund medical school. It turns out medical school can be quite expensive. And I had a job for $7 an hour, but that really wasn't going to pay the tuition at the end of the day. And luckily, the military has specific scholarships for medical school and dental school and law school and other different specialty schools. But I was able to get a scholarship for medical school. And so that really enabled me to have a different viewpoint around medicine, because instead of being driven by the economics of enormous student loans, I was able to think about, well, where do I want to play in the space of medicine? At the time of graduation, this is almost remarkable to reflect upon. I graduated from medical school in 1990, and that is the year and basically the month that we were off to Iraq. Now, I was stateside, but the military hadn't been activated in many, many years. So the military was activated. I was in the Army. The Army went off, and I was stationed at Letterman Army Medical Center for my internship there. When I went after the Iraq engagement, I was then stationed at Fort Myer, which is close to the Pentagon. It's one of the support organizations for the Pentagon. And I decided to be a general medical officer. And so it actually was great, because I had such a variety of, whether it was soldiers that were young and family planning, or pediatrics, or retirees who were on, the other stages of their lives. It was just a fantastic experience. But I decided at the time to go back to law school. And so had an opportunity to go to Georgetown Law School at night. So in the day, I would get in my military uniform, practice medicine, jump into my civvies, go across the bridge, and go to law school. And it turned out it was really interesting, because the practice of medicine takes a certain hypothetical testing, kind of an algorithmic approach to, if this, then this, if this, then this. Whereas law really is, I need to get to this result, and I'm on this side or I'm on this side, and this is how I'm going to navigate to get there. So it was kind of this analytical thinking versus this very algorithmic thinking, if you will. And so the two together were really fascinating to me. I graduated from law school. There's a lot of life in between, of course, but I started practicing law. I was doing medical malpractice defense work for a few years, and realized, to be honest with you, that doctors are not very fond of lawyers, no matter what side of the table that they sit on.
I kind of
And
feel before you went to law school,
exactly.
saved you some years.
Exactly. Yeah. So I then went into more corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, licensing work, with a focus on medical products. And so whether it was devices or pharmaceuticals, and I was in California at the time. And then at some point decided to go in-house to Amgen, and I went into the law department there, and it was just a fabulous experience. Was asked to move over to regulatory affairs, and regulatory actually is a lot like law, in the sense that there are black and white rules. There are precedents that are set by the way the regulatory agencies may interact or require certain things of other pharmaceutical companies. And then, of course, there are facts, which I like to think is data. So we bring data forward. We try to think about how to get this product to the patients and conform with the regulatory expectations.
And just for everybody who's
Yeah.
listening, when we talk about regulatory agencies in the United States, for the most part, we're talking about the Food and Drug Administration. And I think what most people don't realize is how much there is that are rules, that guidelines, that guide what pharmaceutical companies can do, and how much pharmaceutical companies bend over backwards to stick to the letter of that law. That might not be how everybody perceives it or how it's portrayed in the media, but I know on a day-to-day working basis, that is what really happens.
Absolutely. And I think it's a really excellent point. The amount of research, investigation, discussion with the FDA is critical and important for each milestone or stage gate that a product goes through. So listeners can be assured that when products reach the general population, there has been years and years of research, years and years. COVID vaccine, I'm going to put on a hypertrack. We can talk about that in a different way. But for the most of us, the medicines that they're seeing have been in preclinical and clinical research for over a decade. Over a decade. Lots of conversations go on with lots of regulatory agencies, and the companies are compelled ethically and then also by law to make sure that they follow those regulations and rules and bring the best product forward to the patients.
And those rules include the exact words and language that you can even use in your marketing and advertising. The number one question I get from people about pharmaceutical marketing and advertising is, why do they always put that long disclaimer at the end of every commercial where they tell you every side effect that ever happened to anybody in the universe? And I want you to give me the 1 minute answer, because of course we could give a whole lecture on that topic.
Yeah. No, it's called fair balance, and we need to make sure that when we talk about the efficacy or the benefits of the medicine, that we don't persuade you so much on the benefits that you don't have an acknowledgement or an understanding of the risks. That risk portion can be very long because we talk about almost anything that showed up during the controlled clinical trial. So there's a lot of rules and nuances, but we want to make sure that the consumer understands the benefits and the risks so they can have the conversation with their healthcare provider. Is this the right medicine for me? And I think I get it, right? I get it. It's a lot, a disclosure at the very end, and I know it's fast and but at least it just waves a flag, right? Waves a flag. Great things can happen with this drug. You also need to talk about the risks with your healthcare providers.
So let's fast forward now. Of course, I could talk about your background all day long, but tell us in a nutshell, what is your exact job now at Organon, this new spin-off women's health company?
So I like to think of it as having two jobs. So we picked up and spun out 64 products, and these products are products that patients around the globe rely on right now. We call them established brands. A lot of these products have been around for a long time.
They're in established brands from Merck.
Yes, in cardiovascular, in pulmonary disease. I like to think of them as rock stars, aging rock stars. And as every aging rock star has, there's cover bands. And I like to think of those as the generics, right? So you have the aging rock star and you have some cover bands. It doesn't mean that the rock star isn't still a rock star. So we've got these great products that are relied on by patients globally. And so my organization supports those established brands, make sure that we work with manufacturing so the supply chain is there. We work with the regulatory agencies, and we are constantly scanning the environment for any new safety effects, right? We're looking to make sure we're constantly surveilling to make sure that there isn't new information that we need to disclose to patients or to healthcare providers. We also have a small number of biosimilars, which also came over from Merck. And biosimilars are a really important part of the healthcare system.
So
biosimilar,
what biosimilars?
Absolutely.
That's something that I get a lot of questions about. That even doctors are confused about. What is this and where did it come from?
Absolutely. So when you think about a pill, the requirement for a pill is that a generic pill needs to be bioequivalent. And pills are different because they are, I like to think of them almost as baking a cake, right? But if you were making, or cookies rather, if you're making a chocolate chip cookie and you're a generic, you have to bake a cookie where every chocolate chip is in exactly the same place as the original cookie, right? It has to be bioequivalent. The ingredients have to be the same. You have to buy the ingredients from the same store, right? You can't have any deviations. It needs to be bioequivalent. Biosimilars come from living organisms. They can come from yeast or other cells, and they are derivatives of living organisms, usually proteins that are skimmed off, purified, and made into a biologic. you cannot, it's really hard actually batch to batch, even to make sure that you don't have a wide range of the specifications in a bio-original batch. Biosimilars, because you cannot get to the exact equivalence because you may have a different, the cell line is older, it could be any other reason, it has to be biosimilar. And so the FDA was very specific around calling the biosimilars instead of bioequivalent. It's almost impossible to be bioequivalent, but they do require studies to make sure that the efficacy and the safety is basically the same. And so you can be assured that the quality, the safety, and the positive efficacy is going to be similar to the bio original.
Okay, and these products are in specific therapeutic areas?
Some of them are. We have oncology and inflammation. And so we have biosimilars to some of the big biologics, and we are in partnership with Samsung. So those products also came over. So part of my organization is really maintaining those relationships, maintaining those registrations. I like to call that the keep it on the market work, right? You got to keep those products on the market. But then we have
the good stuff.
Yes, now we get to the good stuff. This is what we want to talk about. So then the other part of research and development really is, so this other stuff is regulatory, it's safety, it's a group called medical affairs. They interact with the healthcare providers and such. But the other piece really is new drugs, right? New drugs, new devices, new diagnostics, digital overlays. How do we improve women's health? So that is the focus of the entrepreneurial side of the organization. It is small, we are building, but that is where the pipeline will come in. So I like to think of women's health as a rocket ship, and established brands and biosimilars are really important to our company because they are the rocket fuel to launch women's health. And so our focus, we spend all of our time on the entrepreneurial side thinking about what the next products are to bring forward to women to help with their diseases or well-being.
And my understanding is that you're not starting from zero there. You're bringing over at least one established brand.
Absolutely.
And I heard we're making breaking news here that you've recently acquired another company.
We did. So we have a very strong presence in contraception and infertility. So we have a range of products in both contraception and fertility, which are in our established brands. One, we're still doing some life cycle enhancements. So a couple of the products, we're looking at additional geographic requirements and seeing if we can provide these therapies to women in other countries by doing additional clinical research in those countries. And as you mentioned, just recently, I think it might have been June 6th or June 4th, I can't remember the exact date, we acquired Alydia Health. And this was a big acquisition for us for a couple of reasons. We are all coming from Merck. Merck is a traditional pharma company, right? You might have some combination products, but where there's a device and a product put together. But overall, we were a pharmaceutical company. We've spun out, and what we want to be is multimodality. And so in the sense, instead of saying, we're really excited and we're going to build a business line around a certain product or a certain mechanism of action for a drug, we are going to build the business line around the woman with the disease or the condition in the center. So if you think about, for instance, endometriosis, and you put a woman with endometriosis in the middle of your pipeline and say, what are the solutions I can offer her? Well, one of them would be earlier and more accurate diagnosis, right? We know women generally see 8 to 10 physicians over the space of months or years before they get that accurate diagnosis of endometriosis. Ideally, you might want to have a diagnostic that also monitors the stage of the disease, right? Because then women who have severe endometriosis, they may want to make a choice around fertility options later on in their life, right? Maybe I freeze. Yes, absolutely.
Because I know there's at least 14 people listening who don't know what endometriosis is.
Oh,
so let's just take
I apologize.
back and explain to people fairly simply what endometriosis is, who's affected by it, and why this is such a huge problem, not just in the United States, but also worldwide.
Absolutely. So endometriosis, just simply and quickly, is when the endometrium of the uterus,
So the lining of the
the
uterus,
lining of the uterus, the lining of the uterus escapes the uterus, sneaks out, maybe through the fallopian tubes or otherwise, and it mimics just like that uterine lining does in your uterus on a monthly basis.
so basically what's happening, or what we believe is happening, because there's probably a Nobel Prize waiting for somebody who really can figure out what endometriosis is really caused by. The lining of the uterus or womb is shed monthly in women who are menstruating. That's normal, completely normal. It comes out. The cervix goes through the vagina, and that's what menstrual blood looks like. In endometriosis, what happens is it's going the other direction. So it can get anywhere in the abdominal cavity, the pelvic cavity. And I actually, every time I give a lecture, I always say I could predict 50% of the questions up front. 25% of the questions will be a little unusual. And every time I give a lecture on women's health, there's always one question about something I never heard of before. And one time I got a question about endometriosis of the lung.
Oh, wow.
So, turns out that's a thing, but really, 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 really rare. For everybody else, though, tell us where are the most common places that endometriosis can attach or grow.
Yep, in the pelvic area, in the abdominal cavity, in the pelvic area, and it can cause bleeding internally. It can cause pain, right? Just as you cramp other places, you can have pain in your pelvic and abdominal cavity, and in some women, it can cause scarring, and the scarring leads to more pain and more, and it can lead to infertility depending on the severity. So it can be quite a significant disease, and women can experience it very young in their, after their first menstrual period, and it starts to develop. And so it's usually, I don't want to say a disease of younger women. It's not in menopausal women.
Condition.
Yeah, it's a condition. Yes, it's a condition.
Like menstruation, it generally resolves after menopause.
That's right.
So we're usually harping on the bad things about menopause, but a couple of good things about menopause. Endometriosis tends to go away, decline, become less problematic. Fibroids tend to go away, become less problematic, and migraines.
Yep.
I can't think of any other good stuff.
I was going to say that's 3 in the positive category. When do we get to the other side?
Also move out.
That's right.
To go in the positive category. So we have had other guests talk about endometriosis, and we did in fact have a woman physiotherapist from Australia who talked about her own personal experience with endometriosis, which led her to become a women's health PT. And she did have it pretty severely as a teenager. But one of the striking things about endometriosis, which is going to be challenging, I would think, to develop a diagnostic, is that there's not necessarily a correlation between the extent of the endometriosis that we see, say when we do a special surgery where we put a scope in through the belly button and look internally. There's not necessarily a correlation between how much involvement we see and the patient's symptoms. And that's kind of one of the mysteries.
No, it's exactly right. And frankly, it's not just a challenge for the diagnostic, it's a challenge to find the therapeutic, because how do you measure the effect, the positive benefit of a therapeutic if you can't find that correlation? And so that has been a challenge for many drug developers, and it's one that we have to face on. And you can use things, surrogate endpoints such as pain relief, but it's very hard. And what ideally, again, if you put that woman in the center of the pipeline, you want not just symptom relief, you want disease modification, right? You want to stop the progression of the disease.
Well,
so then you've got to measure it again, right?
But here's where listening to the patient is kind of really super important.
Yes.
Because there are women who have endometriosis who've already had as many children as they want to have. And preserving fertility is not their primary objective. So for those women, it would be enough to develop a medication that would treat their pain and their symptoms. There's another subset of women who have been trying to get pregnant and didn't even
Yeah.
find out that they had endometriosis till they had been trying to get pregnant for well
Right.
over a year, because of course the definition of infertility is well-timed intercourse without
That's right.
protection. And the
That's right.
well-timed is, sometimes a bugaboo for a lot of people. But then there's a subgroup of women who know they have endometriosis long before they want to have children. And then they're in the position of preserving their fertility
Exactly.
or choosing to freeze their eggs.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So when you put a woman in the middle and around in the center with endometriosis, you start to think of what are the possibilities and how do you, instead of just being a diagnostic company or just being a therapeutic company or just being a device company, how do you bring that together that can be really powerful for women? Because I really think that it's important that it's not just innovation, it's also information, it's choice, which some of our conditions and illnesses, we don't have a lot of choices,
Well,
and
it's
then
also
access.
integration.
It is.
Integration
Absolutely.
of all these
Absolutely.
different modalities. And one of the things that really frustrated me 100 years ago when I was a medical director of a major pharmaceutical company is there were so many times these great innovations would come to my attention, and I would bring it to our development people and they would say,
Right.
we're a pharmaceutical company, we're not a
Right.
device company, or we're not a
Right.
diagnostic company. But many times those things work hand in hand. And as you know from your background, we've even had drugs in the past. I can actually only think of one um, where it was required to have a certain blood test and
Hmm.
have markers before you can
Of
even
course.
get that drug. Actually, when I was at Sandoz 100 years ago, I think we had the first drug that was approved with the requirement
Mm,
that you had to have certain blood tests first. And that was
mm,
a psychiatric product called clozaril, um, because it had very dangerous
yeah.
potential side effects. And then, of course, Accutane is very well known that
Yep.
you have to, swear that you're on using some kind of
Yep.
reliable contraception before you can be put on it. So the integration component and coordination of
Right.
all of these things, I think, would be really
And it sets up challenges, right? And I think, 100 years ago, absolutely, or 20 years ago, I don't think that pharma companies collaborated quite as much as they do now, right? It felt like when I first joined industry, it was yours. You held onto your own. You developed your own. There might have been some early research projects with academic centers, but generally the companies wanted to own it, right? To mark out the four corners of what their freedom to operate is basically with that particular asset. I think over the last 20 years, you've seen a lot of different ways that pharma collaborates with other pharma diagnostic companies, device companies, and some companies like Roche or J&J, they have divisions internally that also satisfy some of these areas, whether it's devices or diagnostics. So it is interesting, and that is one of the challenges of the entrepreneurial side, is making sure that we have the right connections and collaborations. Um, right now we've got a new device. It's great. That's how we started this conversation. It's fantastic.
So tell us
Built.
about that.
Oh yeah, and
And
and of course building around that. So we acquired Alydia Health, and the reason why it's exciting is because it's a device. It is a device to treat postpartum hemorrhage.
Okay.
So hemorrhage that occurs, or bleeding, excessive bleeding that occurs after a woman gives birth, that in this case isn't controlled by medications that are standard protocols that physicians use. And
This is a leading cause of
absolutely,
maternal death, not only currently and worldwide, but also historically.
exactly.
Number one cause of women dying after childbirth. And I regret that I didn't look up the statistics. Do you have any handy statistics about the percentage of women
I
who
do.
die in childbirth from
Um,
postpartum bleeding?
yes, I do. Well, I have a statistic around, it is 10% of women experience postpartum hemorrhage to the extent of needing a medical intervention. So that's 1 in 10 women overall. The death rate is, let me see if I have, I don't think I have an exact
I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
number. No. I
While
don't have an exact number of,
I will
yeah.
share that one of the really most distressing things to me as a physician, as a woman, as a mom, is that the maternal death rate in the United States of
Yes,
America and in New
terrible.
Jersey, where I live,
Yeah.
is the only country in the world that it's in the only developed country in the world
Yep.
where the death rate is increasing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're supposed to be so progressive and modern and have all of
Right.
these tools at our disposal, and yet more and more women are dying postpartum or after giving birth.
That's exactly right. And
In
certain
20 years.
populations, right. And certain populations of women are affected disproportionately
Absolutely.
and
So
unevenly. And that's
racial
the same, yeah,
racial
with global
disparities
too.
are
Yep,
huge.
exactly.
African American women in Texas, I did look that up, have at least a 30% to 50% higher death rate than white women in Texas
Wow.
after giving birth. So racial disparities are huge, but also geographic disparities. So based on your zip code, you
Mm.
can have very different
Mm-mm-mm.
odds of surviving childbirth.
Yep.
And then, of course, we have a huge divide between urban and rural places, where rural hospitals are canceling and
Yep.
closing their maternity wards. So it's not uncommon for a woman in rural, easy for me to say, America to have to drive an hour and a half to get medical care. So
Yeah, and then when you place it on top of a low or middle income country, you can imagine those numbers and statistics just get amplified. And I can't imagine anything scarier, to be honest with you. I just can't. So we were thrilled to get this device, as well as the company, the experts inside the company, as we think about different iterations of the device. And this device is relatively simple to use and can help the physician treat relatively quickly postpartum hemorrhage. And so the physician always has a number of tools at their disposal. And this is one of the tools. One of our other commitments, though, is this device right now is only approved in the United States. And our commitment is not just to get this device approved in the major markets, as our commercial colleagues like to say, but also to get a version, to develop a version of the device that can be used in these situations where there may not be ready-made, the highest level of clinical care available. So, again, putting yourself in the woman's shoes in that lower middle and income country in that clinic, how can we develop a device that can be an option for a physician who is facing a rapidly progressing and scary situation such as postpartum hemorrhage? So for us, it's great. It's great. It's an opportunity.
Called Lydia.
It is not. The device is called Jada. So it's called Jada in the United States. And it is currently available only in the United States. And so, we're working on it.
In hospital device, or is this?
Oh, definitely in hospital. Right now in hospital, it relies on wall suction as part of the mechanism of the device. And so basically the device is inserted into the uterus and uses suction to mimic or have the uterus mimic the contractions and close down. And so you can bring an atonic uterus to a more collapsed state, and hopefully as it contracts, close off those vessels, those blood vessels that are bleeding. And so, yeah,
designed to be used in conjunction with Pitocin or any of the other medicines that we currently use to.
It is. And usually those medications are first line. And so this is more as a woman continuing to progress, right? So it's just another tool in the physician's toolkit to actually, help control the situation. But right now it is approved for use in, and I wouldn't say just hospitals, but, birthing center, things like with the wall suction, with the right support. So again, but you can even think of,
has to physically get there.
Right. But you can imagine, even in this country, there are plenty of situations where women are choosing to deliver in places that are not hospital wards. And so again, we want to make sure that we have a device that can accommodate the many, many different ways that women choose to experience their birth. And you can have, just because you decide to choose your birth experience, a little bit differently, doesn't mean you shouldn't have the same access to a device that could help you if you have that emergent situation.
Well, the other issue is that we're discharging women so quickly after
It's true.
delivery.
That's true.
Back in the day,
Right.
way before my time, because I did the drive-through delivery myself. But if women were in the hospital for 3 to
Right.
5 days postpartum, if they had a hemorrhage, they were already in the hospital and it could be
Absolutely.
addressed much more quickly, as opposed to being home with a newborn and
Yeah.
needing transportation to the hospital, and also needing awareness that this isn't just the normal, bleeding
Right.
after having a baby. That this
Exactly.
is something that needs and of course, many times this can also happen very fast. So, what causes postpartum hemorrhage aside from giving birth?
Yeah. So,
The risk
there are,
factors.
there are other risk factors. I believe one is if it's happened to you before, right? Then it's likely to happen to you again. There are other risk factors just that you can see as pregnancies progress, preeclampsia, eclampsia. There's all sorts of states where women can be more prone to postpartum hemorrhage. But I think in most cases, it's unclear. It's unclear. You can't predict it. And it's probably very variable with the actual birth experience, very variable. One of the things I was not aware of is I just saw it recently, postpartum hemorrhage after cesarean section. And that threw me for a loop because there's so much control that the physician has when they are doing and performing the cesarean section. I didn't think, of course, because it's the same mechanism, but I thought that same level of control would help them with the visualization or what have you. But it's another, it's not just vaginal births that suffer from postpartum hemorrhage. It's also cesarean
Yeah, and it's getting the
births as well.
uterus to contract.
It's the floppy uterus,
That
right? Getting it
cause
to
uterine
contract.
atony,
Exactly.
or failure to contract. Of course, retained products of conception, or
Absolutely. That is a
essentially
big,
staying stuck is
yep.
less likely with a C-section than with a vaginal birth. But most of the time, it's what I say about most parenting topics or childbirth topics or pregnancy topics. The answer is always, it all depends on everything.
Yep,
Um,
exactly.
and sometimes we just don't know. I like to explain to
Right.
people, the medical term of art, of course, is idiopathic. That means
Yeah.
I'm an idiot and I don't know what
Oh, that's
these
good.
words I wish I knew. I
Right.
wish there are a lot of things in obstetrics we don't know about. We don't know
Yeah.
the cause of preeclampsia, or the
Right.
late term would be toxemia of pregnancy. I clearly remember in medical school, my OB professor saying there's a Nobel Prize waiting for any of you who can
Right.
discover the cause of preeclampsia. And we have some better ideas now, but I don't know that we have anything super
Agreed.
definitive. So anyway, I promised everybody up front we were also going to talk about menopause. Um, and there's probably no area, this theme of listening to women.
Hmm.
And I love that concept. I love this concept of the wall of voices that Organon put together. I love whoever came up with the idea to promote it right in front of the Fearless Girl statue on Wall Street. Um,
CorpCom is amazing.
yeah,
They are.
love that concept. But there's probably no other area after obstetrics and pregnancy that women don't feel listened to as
Hmm.
much as with respect to in regard to menopause. So let's start with, you tell me your story, I'll tell you my story.
Okay, sure,
And
sure.
then we'll figure out where Organon's going to fit.
Yeah,
So this is
yeah,
what
no,
we're gonna talk
exactly.
about.
So I will say that I had a very lucky
Mhm.
woman life, if you will. Easy periods, easy pregnancies. I think I could have delivered on the back of a turnip truck. I mean, just really smooth sailing until menopause. And menopause hit me like a ton of bricks. And for me,
And do you
it
mind saying
was,
what age?
I was 47.
Okay. So
So,
I love educating people about that we always talk about the average age of menopause in the United States being 51.
Mm-hmm.
But that just means average. And
Right.
I can't tell you how many women tell me they went into menopause at 47 and they say, I was really, really, really young. I was 55.
Right.
So just between the two of us, the two
That's
data
right.
points,
That's right. There we are.
averages out to 51.
Right in the middle, right in the middle. And I have to say I was quite lucky because I had my children at 40 and 41.
Mhm.
So I just snuck in under the wire. But so for me, the usual hot sweat, night sweats and hot flashes, those were manageable, right? They weren't pleasant, but they were manageable. But for me, the most profound effect of menopause was my emotional, just swinging back and forth in emotions. I was I had rage that I've never had before. I would have crying jags over the most obscure things that usually wouldn't even, pass by, just like you're driving down the road. And I think the other part was the brain fog. I had significant brain fog. I couldn't remember things. I didn't feel like I could think clearly. And at one point, I was quite concerned that I was either going to lose my job and or lose my family.
Wow.
And I had never experienced anything like it before.
Okay, so that's major.
Yep, it is. It
And you
is.
called 1-800 gynecologist.
I did.
Were you self-aware of the diagnosis, or did you feel like
Absolutely.
you
No.
might have had a thyroid problem?
Oh,
You might have been
a
depressed?
nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I assumed it had something to do with menopause. And so, yeah, I went to the doctor and had the blood work, right? So they could say, yes, you're in menopause.
And of course, we
Oh,
don't have, here's listening to
right.
women, we don't have a really super reliable test for menopause.
We
So
don't.
yes, there is a blood test that, yes, we sometimes rely on, but most of the time, most gynecologists will say menopause is a clinical diagnosis.
That's right.
We make that diagnosis after you haven't had a period for 12 months and there's no other reason, like a surprise pregnancy uh, or some other problem that we can discern. But the problem is that's a retroactive
Absolutely.
diagnosis, and you can have symptoms of menopause for a couple of years before you are in
Hmm.
menopause. So that's not real helpful.
No, no, and the advice wasn't so helpful either. It was eat more soy, which I don't really like.
You went to
And
a medical doctor?
I did, I did. It was eat more tofu, and I'm a big tofu fan.
Were you still in
And
California at the time?
I
Oh,
was in California, of course, of
don't
course.
they
I
say
was,
that to all
yeah,
patients at all
yeah,
visits? You
yeah.
must go to
That's true.
California.
Yeah, it's true. And
It's a good thing
exercise
you weren't
more.
in Florida, because in Florida they would have done a hysterectomy.
Well, yeah, well, yeah, that would have made things much worse. Yeah, so it was a dialogue with my GYN at the time of, look, I exercised more, I ate the soy, I drank the soy milk. It's not helping. I'm afraid of what's happening to me, and I don't know how to make it stop. And so I went on hormone replacement therapy.
Which is the
And
gold standard of therapy for somebody with moderate to severe symptoms. And the way we gauge whether symptoms are mild, moderate, or severe is by the impact they have on your quality of life and your activities of daily living.
right.
And if a patient says to me, I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job and or my family, I'm talking severe.
Yep.
I'm talking, I would have put you on HRT
I
that
know.
day.
I know.
Emergency, like start you're in the office.
Right.
The other problem with menopause, though, that we hear with a lot of people, and this was my experience at 55, I actually sailed through menopause
Hmm.
very inadvertently, despite having a relatively rough childbearing years and periods and the whole mess. But I had and this is one of these things sometimes you hear from doctors where we just didn't know one little fact about something.
Hmm.
We didn't make our own diagnosis. um, I had some spinal surgery, and I was on a medication after my
Interesting.
spinal surgery to treat the pain that I was having from my
Wow.
spinal surgery, a non-narcotic medication. Uh, and unbeknownst to me, I went through menopause at the same time. And
Wow.
unbeknownst to me, that medication had also been submitted to the FDA in the past for
Wow.
approval for the treatment of menopausal symptoms. It never got FDA approval for the treatment of menopausal symptoms because it had too many side effects. But it is approved for the treatment of postoperative neurologic pain. And now you know what drug I'm talking about. And I sailed through menopause until I went off that medication.
Amazing.
And then I went into what I usually call menostop, which is what I usually use as a term of art for women who have their ovaries removed when they haven't gone through menopause, where you go through menopause in one day.
Right. Yeah,
Everything
that's good.
hits you
Yeah.
in that one day. But then
Right.
I Googled it and then I learned what caused the problem. And then I was in my GYN's office as soon as I could, call 1-800-gynecologist. But I went into the office saying either I'm having severe menopausal symptoms, or I'm having a thyroid crisis,
Mm-hmm.
because of course menopausal symptoms can mimic overactive thyroid or underactive, or I'm having like massive depression and anxiety because I could not sleep.
Oh,
And sleep deprivation is the number one symptom that most women in surveys say bothers them. Interestingly, mood swings that you were talking about is the number one symptom that bothers men.
oh.
And it's the number one symptom responsible for that T-shirt that says, "Look out, I'm out of estrogen and I've got a gun."
Oh,
It really makes you feel like
right.
you are crazy.
Right.
So that is a real problem. So I suspect you got treatment and
Yes. And
everything.
for me, it was the exact right treatment. Exact right treatment. And it raises, I just had this dialogue today. It raises interesting questions, right? Around hormone replacement therapy and menopause. And the famous study years ago that
The
said,
Women's Health Initiative of 2001, which I'm always ranting and raving about.
oh, you are? Okay. Yes. So that famous study and the long lasting impact it has had on 2 generations of women going through menopause. And
Because the thing I rant and rave about that study, the Women's Health Initiative, for anybody who hasn't heard me rant and rave about this before, was the largest women's health study ever conducted at that time and probably since. It was a $625 million study conducted by the National Institutes of Health. It was huge. It looked at many different variables. However, it had some serious flaws to the point where 20 epidemiologists, including the late Dr. Trudy Bush, who was highly regarded as one of the most brilliant women epidemiologists ever, and this was her area of expertise, wrote a letter that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine before the study really got launched, saying there's so many problems with this protocol that we're concerned the information won't be useful. But the other thing I rant about is that this study, the results were released by press conference. The press conference was held before any doctors got to read the paper in the medical journal. So we were all blindsided by this. And of course, it got tremendous media coverage and it terrified women. And the fact was, most of the findings were things that were already in the package insert. Most of the findings were things that we already knew. And the upshot, just to finish my story, I also chose hormone therapy for my treatment because I am not afraid of the big bad wolf. And I was very concerned and very knowledgeable about the risks and the benefits. And the fact is, this gets back to now, what I always say about in the ladies' room is we always get back to the original topic, this concept of listening to women. And this concept of where Organon wants to be in the marketplace and as an innovator is that we don't prescribe anything anymore in a one-size-fits-all fashion. There is no treatment. I always say there's no treatment, not even Tylenol, that works for everyone or is appropriate for everyone.
Right.
And this is why the more options we have in our little black bags.
Exactly. Choice. When you think about
women,
Yeah.
I'm always making fun of soy in California.
Yeah.
For some women, drinking soy
It's
milk.
enough. It's
And I
enough.
never
Yeah.
argue with anyone
Right.
who says that something works for them. And the reason for that is probably because 30% of women who go through menopause, despite the other 70% of us bitching and moaning, 30% really have no
Yeah,
significant
they sail
symptoms that
through.
disrupt their lives in any way.
Right.
And maybe sometimes they get a little warm, and so they, layer their clothing, or we turn down the temperature.
Right.
My husband used to say that he couldn't wait till I went through menopause because then finally I would be the right temperature, because I was always freezing, which most women tend to be on the colder side
Right.
until they go through menopause, but not all.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I think it's really important because you think about contraception, and I don't know about you, but when I started on contraception, there was one choice. Well, two choices. You could have a diaphragm, which I don't even know if that's a choice anymore.
it is.
That women, I mean, condoms
Mhm.
and birth control pills. That was it, right? So they were all,
Abstinence.
and abstinence, and those are all short term, right? They're all short term,
When I
and
was
yeah,
20, in my
yeah.
20s or early 20s, that's when the contraceptive sponge was also
Oh,
available,
nice. Yeah,
but
yeah.
caused a tremendous number of serious allergic reactions, not systemic allergic reactions, but topical
Right.
allergic reactions. And it also was difficult to remove. And there was also a cervical cap, which hardly anybody knew about and hardly
Right.
anybody
Hard to use.
used.
Yeah.
Even in my training as an OBGYN, I never fitted one.
Right. Right. And I think we had IUDs, but my
IUDs
point
were
being,
off the
there's
market, ironically,
yeah.
in a window during that
Yep.
time period. And so when I was in residency, IUDs were not available.
Oh wow.
But now,
Wow.
of course, are.
Now they're back. Yeah. And so my point being, there's a lot of choice. You can have long acting, short acting, a rod, a ring, an IUD, a diaphragm cap. There's a million choices. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had that many choices to treat the symptoms of menopause?
And wouldn't it be amazing if we still had more choices for
Exactly.
contraception?
Exactly. Exactly.
More choices that addressed more needs and concerns of women. Um, there's certainly lots of women comedians who rant and rave about, all of the symptoms and all of the things we go through. But one of your anchor products, I understand, is Nexplanon.
It is.
So you
And
want to
that's
explain to people what that is?
sure, absolutely. So Nexplanon is a rod. It's a rod that is injected or placed into the upper arm, and it has a long-acting contraceptive. So women can use the Nexplanon rod for 3 years for birth control. So it is, it's not if you're thinking about having a family next month, right? Because then you would have to have the rod removed. It's if you're thinking longer term, I want to put off starting a family or having another child for 2 to 3 years. You can have the rod removed, and just like any other birth control, there are risks associated with the rod because the rod can move depending on placement, but also the medication in the rod. And so it's a progesterone basically, and so it has the same risks as a progesterone component of depo-progesterones or the progesterone component of birth control pills. So it's there again. It's a choice that needs to be discussed with a physician when a woman is making those plans. I think that the challenge, to your point, is not just that there probably aren't enough contraceptive choices, because some women may want to take a pill every week or every month or whatever it might be, is not all physicians offer all the choices. And so how do we get or knowledgeable, right? Exactly.
Or are able to do the counseling portion
Right.
of that. And here's
And
where
that takes time.
I have to give a shout out to all my nurse practitioners who are listening, especially the nurse practitioners in women's health. Nurse practitioners do a phenomenal job in general with counseling on contraceptive options. And another shout out to Planned Parenthood and other family planning centers that do a phenomenal work in counseling. And we have, this is what you were talking about before, about sort of decision tree medicine. And the way I always like to describe it to or help people with it is when they come in asking for a contraceptive, it helps me to know where they are in their decision process. If they come in asking for the pill, okay, then this is
Easy.
easy. If they
Right.
come in asking for an IUD, then I have to say, okay, do you want hormones, a hormonal IUD, or a
Hmm.
non-hormonal IUD? And invariably the question is, oh, I didn't know there was a difference. What's the difference?
Right.
Um, but I don't usually go into every single option. And there are companies now who are working on devices to help people with what we used to call natural family planning, which the old OBGYN joke is,
Absolutely.
what do you call a woman who uses natural family planning for contraception?
Pregnant.
Mom.
Mom. Oh, that's good. That's
Um,
good.
but there are now devices that can make that process much more scientific. And when I say devices, I mean devices beyond a thermometer that can actually check your urine hormone levels to vary on a daily basis or in the days when you're most likely to get pregnant to actually calculate
Absolutely.
how likely you are to get pregnant. Of course, when we're talking about contraception, we invariably tell women if you look at a boy, you can get pregnant. Um, if we're talking about women who want to conceive, then we start telling the truth and we say, well, really, there's only a window of 5 to 6 days of the cycle that you're most
Right.
likely to conceive. And women look at me like, I never heard this. In biology
That's
class,
great.
in health class, they told me I could get pregnant even if I had my period.
Oh, that's
Um,
funny. Yeah, that's
so,
true.
it's the risk
Rare.
benefit
Right.
ratio.
Right.
So anyway, tell people next one on is what we call LARC or
Yes.
long
Long
acting
acting
reversible contraception.
contraception. Yep.
How is that different from other forms of contraception?
Well, it's different
I
because
know
it
you
is long
said it, but
acting.
I want to put it in the
Yep,
context
yep,
of
yep, yep.
that.
And again, it goes back to when you think about your family planning, right? It's inserted. It takes a procedure. An IUD is inserted. It takes a procedure. It's not something that you put in and out every month. So you have to think ahead. For instance, after I had my second child, we did not want to have additional children, and I chose to have an IUD because I knew that I didn't want to have additional children for X amount of time. And I had the hormonal IUD. And so and I think I had a 5 year, if I recall, duration. And so that allowed me, okay, once and done, right? Once and done. Other people want a different level of control. They also may want to experience, if it's their first time experiencing hormonal control, they may want to do something that's more short acting. They may have family plans, something that I want to start a family in 3 months. I want to start a family in a year, where the long acting reversible contraception is probably not the right choice for them. So I think it goes back to choices. But to your point, having the conversation, right? Having the conversation and understanding what your choices are and thinking ahead in your options, I think is really important. But the fact that we have so many options is fantastic. And, going back to just our earlier conversation, I find it remarkable that, at 46, I can have a hormonal IUD, and at 47, somehow it's challenging to get hormone replacement therapy, right? It's like, so what happened between that? It's very interesting that my life can be controlled with hormones up until menopause, and then it's sort of a different conversation. And it goes back to really understanding, I think, our different hormonal status and finding therapy that is unique and specific to the patients, and providing choices and
I
access.
once thought it would be very interesting to do a study, and maybe Organon wants to do this, looking at women physicians and comparing the
Interesting.
choices we make for ourselves versus the percent of women who are not physicians who make
Yeah,
those
it's
choices.
interesting. That would be
So for
interesting.
example,
Hmm.
with respect to hormone replacement therapy and menopause, I would be willing to bet a lot of money that a majority of women physicians, especially, and you could even break it out by OBGYNs, but almost every woman OBGYN I know who doesn't have a contraindication. And of course, contraindication means, oh, no way, no how, over my dead body am I going to prescribe this for you because you have a serious risk. But for women who don't have those risks, in my experience, most OBGYNs are happy with some form of hormone replacement. And I always have to remind people too, that when we're talking about hormone replacement therapy, we're not talking about one drug. We're talking probably 100 different products. We're talking pills, patches, creams, rings, gels, inserts. We're talking, did I say injections? Yes. We're talking different combinations of different hormones, generally an estrogen and a progestin, but sometimes one and not the other. So classically, a woman who doesn't have a uterus does not need a progestin. And of course, in the Women's Health Initiative that we talked about, those two groups, women with a uterus and women without a uterus, responded extremely differently in the study.
Right.
It was one of the big question marks. And we could, of course, talk about this all day, but in the interest of time and in the interest of making people interested in reading your life story autobiography out, I just do want to wrap up by first of all congratulating you and on your position, congratulating Organon on this very successful spinoff, congratulating them on this innovative business strategy to actually listen to women. And I also can't let you go unless I answer the same question we ask all our guests, which is to share with us your most unique, interesting, memorable, or different story that ever happened to you in a ladies' room, aside from this interview, of course.
No, I love that question. So I would say it's an ongoing experience, especially in public restrooms. It's the writing on the wall I find fascinating, right? You learn interesting things about people. Some even have names, but there's just, and I think it depends on the venue. Like what is on the top of mind of a woman who's in the restroom who feels the need to take out that ink pen and write a message. And sometimes it's profound. It's a poem, it's a what have you. I actually find that those are interesting reads. I don't know why there's not a table book of bathroom wall graffiti, but I think it would make it's sort of the here for her health listening. And what is on top of mind for a woman, in the restroom when she has a moment alone. So
that's a great answer to this question, and nobody has ever mentioned that before. But now I'm thinking that could be a really interesting project for your Wall of Voices 2.0.
There you go. I'm sure my communication people would love to go to the bathroom walls.
Now they're writing this down. That would be a great idea, like a wall. I'm seeing like a blank wall, a blank slate. Of course, I did see in the museum in Washington, D.C. when it was open, the parts of the Berlin Wall that they had, and the graffiti and the comments and the things that people wrote on the Berlin
and on both
Wall.
sides, right? On both sides of that wall.
The differences between what was on one side versus the other. The East German side was very clean, but the West German side was, where people had really expressed themselves. I think that is a wonderful idea. And I love talking to you about so much. I can't believe, I think we accomplished all the things I lied about that we were going to accomplish. And I think that's the first time that's ever happened in the ladies' room. So thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Thank you everybody for tuning in, and stay tuned till next time when we are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica.
That's all we have time for today. But let's keep the conversation going on Twitter or Facebook at Dr. Donica. And please join us next week for another episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Real conversations with real women about really intimate topics.